Good afternoon. Today is April 21st, and today is April 21st, City of Prescott City Council Special Study Session. Roll call, please.
Mayor Rusing.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fruworth.
Here.
Councilwoman Frederickson. Here. Councilman Gambogi.
I am here.
Councilman Gehring.
Here.
Councilman Grady.
Here.
And Councilman Ruby.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you.
And our first item is presentation and discussion regarding the City of Prescott Hillside Development Standards and overall Land Development Code updates. Alex is going to give that presentation, and thank you everybody for bearing with us while we addressed those technical issues at the start of the meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Bramlett, the Planning Manager for Community Development Department. Thanks for having me this afternoon. I'm here to go over the Land Development Code, just a brief cap on general updates, and then we'll dive into the Hillside Development Standards, which is the majority of what's being presented today. So our land development code hasn't been completely revamped in over 20 years. There have been a few updates along the way, but it's definitely due for a nice refresh touch. So that's something we have on the docket. It hasn't been started yet. Staff has been kind of compiling all the sticking points that we've come across along the way. So we have a running list of that, and our goal is to get a consultant on board. We have that budgeted as the upcoming fiscal year. So we're going to plan on heading underway with that, and so that will be kicked off here hopefully in the next few months. So that's just a general touch on the Land Development Code updates. Moving on to the large majority of why we're here. So these are the purposes that are currently in our Hillside Development Standards. We heard a lot from Mayor and Council, concerns of the community, that the current Hillside Development Standards only apply to subdivision and planned area developments. The request of staff was to take a look at our existing standards and see if we can expand them to also apply to single site development. So we have done that. And again, this was just a not revamp of the whole code itself, but to just expand it to hit on the single site development. And I'll go over the process we went through to do that, what we've proposed forth at this point in time, and those draft changes. So when analyzing the existing Hillside Development Standards, again, as you go through, it really hits on subdivision, planned area development. But once you get to this table that I'll pull up LDC in a moment, this is where it can really apply to single site development. Is you have steep slope categories. So in general, the Hillside Development Standards do not apply to sites with slopes 20% or less. So if you have a property, whether you're subdividing it, doing a planned area development, or single site development, it's not applicable. These regulations don't kick in. The minute you have steeper slopes greater than 20% is when we're going to start seeing the regulations start to apply. And I'm going to pivot real quick just to the Land Development Code to show you a few things. But I have to go this way. So, bigger, can do, hang tight. Okay. Are we good? Does it need to be bigger? We're good. Okay, super. Okay, so this is that table that I just had in my slide that is currently existing in our Land Development Code, and it really touches on what could be applied for to the single site development. And so I'll go back to the slide, but what you see underneath is this table interpretation. Again, this is our existing code. It talks about interpreting the table for non-PAD preliminary plots, i.e. just a normal subdivision, and then it talks about how that table applies to a planned area development. So what we did was further expand on the table to add it and apply to single site development. And to kind of hit, I know there was some concerns about some rearrangement. We haven't changed the content here at all, so everything stays the same. We just reorganized it to fit better, including the single site development. So what you see on the slide is just, again, a breakdown of how this table applies. Big picture, and I'll go over some examples you've seen. There's a lot of maps. We'll be going into those to provide some examples. So the maximum disturbable area, regardless, again, if it's a subdivision, planned area development, or single site, the maximum disturbable area percentages cannot be exceeded. So if you have a parcel that has slopes 20 to 30%, this table is saying that of those slopes that are steeper in the 20 to 30% range, you cannot disturb more than 30%. Again, I'll show a couple examples of how this applies, but regardless of the type of development, each type can't exceed the disturbable area. Moving on to minimum lot area, this applies when you're doing a normal subdivision. If you have, because when you have slopes, it's likely not the same slope. It's going to be, you have 20% to 30, you have 30 to 40. There's a wide variety of different slopes on that parcel. The table is saying that if you have multiple slope categories on one lot, so there's 0 to 40, you have every single slope category, it's saying that the one that dominates the lot is the one that regulates the minimum lot area. So of the lot, if you have all slope categories, if majority of that site is 30 to 40% slopes, you have to have a 2-acre minimum parcel size. Again, I'll show some examples to demonstrate this in a moment. Further, for a planned area development, a lot of what a PAD does is reduce the size that's allowed for a lot and shifts it. So again, I'll go over a couple examples, but the current regulations say that the minimum lot area isn't limited to for the planned area development, and we kept that language there. We just cleaned it up a little bit. And then the thing we added in the last bullet point at the bottom is the minimum lot area. If it is a single site development, the lot's already existing. They're not changing it, so the minimum lot area in this case would not apply.
Mayor,
Yes, Jim.
I got a question. So I'm reading through the example in the board portal, section 6.8, and I'm reading applicability. It looks like this new section is applicable to the following developments with slopes greater than 20%. Proposed residential land splits and subdivisions, not single lots, and for commercial or multifamily development, lots that are greater than 2 acres. So the way I read that, if you have a single-family lot of any description and slope, it doesn't apply. And the same with a commercial or multifamily residential lot that's, say, 1.9 acres. This would not apply. I mean, that's what it literally says.
That is what staff came up with in trying to see how this could apply to single site development. Where we landed was if you have a 1 acre lot, it's likely not large enough to be impactful to a full hillside. We've established a threshold somewhere. It also means that, yes, if you have a 1/4 acre or half acre lot that you can build a single family home on, these regulations don't apply. That was for a couple different reasons. Largely, we have a lot of steep slopes and we have a lot of single family home lots that only have those steep slopes left. We see a lot of variance requests for garage additions on those properties with existing homes. So we didn't want to limit someone from being able to build just a single family home on their parcel. So that's where the parcel size threshold came in, really trying to target those larger commercial multifamily, larger than 2 acre lots that are being developed was the intention.
I guess my thought is I would much rather come up with limitations on all lots that yet allow a building to occur and still protect slopes.
That is something we can look at. I know that we could try to pull through GIS a way to know how many undeveloped lots are left that are single family. Again, we were trying to be mindful not to be impactful to someone trying to build a home and making it so that with the limitations of the percentages that they couldn't build on their their property.
Mr. Young, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just think it's important to bring up when we're talking about applying to all lots. Say, for example, a commercial lot of 1 acre, and we're limiting the commercial use, or we're limiting the use and applying a hillside development standard to a 1 acre lot, it becomes unbuildable, which actually sounds like a good thing to probably some people. But under Arizona law, Prop 207, if you reduce, for every dollar you reduce in property value, we become responsible to the property owner for that reduction in value. So I think huge reductions in property value by applying, for example, to a 1 acre commercial lot, which doesn't necessarily address the concern we hear, which is large swaths of a mountain cutout and that type of thing. It just opens kind of this big door of paying partial takings. And that was passed, I just looked, Prop 207 feels like it was yesterday. It was 20 years ago now at this point.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I have my button pushed.
Oh, Mr. Gambogi.
This is kind of a follow-up to Councilman Gehrig's question. Over on page 13, we talk about should be considered for the preservation of to the maximum as possible. So I want to make sure I understand this. If you're building an individual home, you can build on a slope. If you're building multifamily or commercial and it's under 2 acres, you can build on a slope. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So what are we trying to do here?
The concerns that we heard were that large properties that are single site development, say a multifamily is going there or a commercial development, these regulations weren't being applied because they currently only apply to subdivision and planned area development. So the intention was to try and address the concern of these large parcels being developed out. We came up with 2 acres as we felt that that was just a number that captured it well enough. We looked at a couple other existing multifamily sites. How big were they? And generally 2 acres was kind of about that threshold. And then further, if it's, again, a normal 1/4 acre or 1/2 acre lot, these regulations, depending on how much slope is there, which there are a lot of vacant sloped sites left, could really limit what they can actually do on their property.
So we want to maintain the beauty of Prescott. Is that maybe a core belief? When I drive on Rosser Road, usually under duress because I don't like to drive on Rosser Road, if I'm going east and I look north, I see a plethora of homes on stilts. And I don't know how tall those stilts are, but I'm sure that's more than 2 acres. So are we really taking care of the beauty of Prescott when we've got a plethora of homes on stilts, more than 2 acres, on much steeper than 30%? That's okay, and putting a multifamily home on a slope is not okay if it's over 2 acres? I'm not seeing uniformity in this.
The 2 acres, and I can show a few examples here in a moment of subdivision, a planned area development, and multifamily, and how that can play out in each scenario. But in that case, if it's greater than the 2 acres, they're going to need to show, if they're doing any kind of development, that they're not exceeding the allowable disturbable area in each slope category.
Now, I've always said I don't work 40 hours a week, but I work 7 days a week because I get emails and phone calls and text messages complaining about a lot of things. But I've not received one email, phone call, text message, or being intercepted at Fry's over this issue. How'd this get started?
This became started, there was a property last year that was receiving a rezone. Long story short, they asked for an interpretation in our land development code of the Hillside development standards. We produced that interpretation as it applies currently written to subdivision and planned area developments. We produced that written interpretation. It was then appealed. It went through the Board of Adjustment process. The Board of Adjustment upheld our interpretation that it applies to subdivision and planned area developments. And then they did recommend we touch base with council on it. And I know that the community has been speaking to some council members. So that's what's being brought forth now is staff has heard the concerns and received the direction from mayor and some council members to make some changes to make this code apply to single site development.
Thank you, Alex.
And can I address one thing you sort of brought up, that this would apply to commercial or a multifamily development of 2 acres, and whether it's fair that it doesn't apply to single family. Now, what this essentially does is reduces the amount of land that can be used on a slope. But single family developments, single home sites, have lot coverage maximums. So they already can't use all of that area. And so this essentially makes multifamily and commercial uses equivalent to subdivisions and so forth, and similar to the lot coverage requirements on a single family site.
I think some of the examples will be helpful, so I'm gonna dive into those now, if I can. Okay. So this is, fortunately, we have a surveyor and staff who helped put this together. So it's not perfection, but it is pretty great to help demonstrate. So we have the gist of what we need to have this conversation. So in this scenario, we have a hillside subdivision being proposed.
Excuse me, is this hypothetical or
This
real?
is hypothetical, yeah. We created them. So this is in total just about 21 acres for the whole parcel. And we're pretending in this scenario that it's SF 18. So the maximum density is 1 dwelling unit per 18,000 square feet. So if this were a flat piece of land on 21 acres, they could do 21 dwelling units. You factor in now we have hillside development. So going over some of the colors, pink is bad. It's greater than 40, very, very steep. Moving on to the blue areas is less than 40, but greater than 30%, so getting a little bit less steep. The green areas are 20 to 30%, and then the lightest color, kind of the yellow on the screen, is less than 20% slopes. So how the hillside development standards currently apply and will continue to, we're not changing this, to this project right now is firstly, we're gonna look at the minimum lot area, and I think I can get this. Oh, it's not working. Okay. So the base zoning portion of it, again, you can disturb 100%. Moving on to the 20 to 30 and 30 to 40 and greater than 40. So what we're going to be looking at, and let's take lot 1 for example. You have, again, like we mentioned, multiple slope categories on this single site. So how do we determine the minimum lot area? We're taking the slope category that dominates the majority of the parcel. In the case of lot 1, I've highlighted in red the 0.91 acres. That's the largest portion of the lot for that slope category. So the minimum parcel requirement for lot 1 is 2 acres. Another example, moving on to lot 2, there's a lot more pink. So if you look again on the table, highlighted in red, it's the 1.17 acres. So that's saying that of that whole lot, the majority of it, the dominating slope is the greater than 40%, which means that 3 acres has to be the minimum parcel area. Same thing for lot 3, looking at all the acreages within each different slope category. You can see the 1.85 acres for greater than 40%, which means that lot 3 has to meet the minimum 3 acre parcel size. Does that make sense? I'm going to move on to maximum disturbable area if that does. So focusing just on lot 1 for now, so we have our slope categories, and then the next portion of the table is the maximum disturbable area that's pulled from our land development code. And it's again saying 0 to 20% base zoning, you can disturb 100%. If you have 20 to 30% slopes, you cannot exceed 30% disturbance of those slopes. 30 to 40%, you cannot exceed 15% disturbance. Greater than 40%, you can't exceed 10%. So what this table shows us is the maximum disturbable area is what you can't exceed in our code. The next over is the lot area showing of lot 1, these are the different acreages within each slope category, and showing the disturbable area. So the last column is percent disturbed. This is what we're really focusing on. So in the 20 to 30%, you can't exceed 30. They have a disturbable area of 8.2. They're good to go. In the 30 to 40%, they cannot exceed 15, but they're only disturbing 4.4. And then greater than 40%, they can't exceed 10%, and they are disturbing 9.9. So those are the things we're checking for. The lot area has been established. Now we look at the buildable envelope, which is the dashed area. We're checking the percentages and making sure that at the end of the day, the project's not going to exceed the maximum disturbable area.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Ted.
Alex, did I hear you say earlier that the lot is determined by the worst case scenario?
I don't think so. The maybe
So the color would dictate how much area, not the worst color.
no, the color that dominates the most part of the parcel. So going back, looking at lot 2, for example, all of those acreages are broken out. So there's 0.64 acres and 0 to 20%. But what that red one in greater than 40 is indicating is 1.17 acres. So of all the slope categories, majority of that site has slopes greater than 40%, which means that minimum parcel area is going to be based on that slope.
Lois, did you have a comment?
Yes, Ted had asked a question earlier about, what's driving this. And I think, one of the things that I've gotten lots of, not just one, not just at Fry's, I've gotten lots of public comments about the citizens feeling like we're scarring the hillsides of this town, and the mass grading, and the nothing but rocks and nothing but dirt, and the building of rock walls that are getting to the point of being eyesores. And that's the quality of life and the quality of place that the citizens have been wondering if we've been enforcing our hillside code. So I'm glad we're having a discussion about the Hillside Code, but I've come to appreciate some of these feedback items in my pre-work for this meeting aren't just the Hillside Code. It also involves land development code changes as well. So I just wanted to answer, Ted, your point that you had brought up, because I've gotten quite a few comments, and I could point to the hills in the direction of where the feedback has been coming from.
Any more comments? Okay, please continue.
So just to reemphasize the point and make sure it's clear, I'm just going to do another example for lot 3 going over the disturbable area, and you can see the dashed area on lot 3 is down on the lower portion. So again, we have our slope categories broken out. We know what the maximum disturbable is that they can't exceed. We have the lot area and the disturbable pointed out. So looking at that right column, the percent disturbed, again, we're making sure those percentages are not exceeding the maximum disturbable area. And in this case, with this proposed building envelope, they are not exceeding the disturbable allowance within each slope category. So that's subdivision. I'm going to move on to a planned area development if we're feeling okay. Alrighty. So a planned area development subdivision, we stuck to just the same theoretical site. It's still 21 acres. This is still single family 18, but with the planned area development. So obviously this looks a lot different. Our code with a planned area development says the maximum density can be 2.2 dwelling units per acre. So in this case, 46 is the maximum allowable. So again, we are just making sure in a planned area development, the real driving intent is to reduce the minimum lot area and cluster the development. As you can see, it's not anywhere on the hillside. They've clustered it down. It does hit into some of the 20 to 30% and exceeds those areas, but the intention is really shifting that development. So when we look at the percent disturbed area, you can see that between 20 and 30% slopes, it's 62, which exceeds the allowable 30. And then the 30 to 40 is 25, exceeding that too. Again, this is hypothetical. Some could fine tune these numbers, but the intention too is that planned area developments come to council. This is all part of the consideration. It's a shifting of all the development off the hillside, and maybe the give and take is it's a little bit exceeding 20 to 30. I don't know what that looks like, but that's all part of what the review is in the regards of looking at it that way. And so another layer, if I guess we feel good about this, I'm gonna add more. So another layer to a planned area development subdivision is the density transfer bonus. What this is really trying to do is get further the density off of the hillsides and onto the less steep part of the parcel. And so there is a calculation in the code, and you can see the density transfer bonus column. The intent, again, getting it off the hillsides and then into lower slopes. So in this scenario, we have the column, the percent of undisturbed area. So for the 20 to 30% slope category, it's saying that 2 acres is undisturbed. We took the development from the hill, and 2 acres of that in the 20 to 30% has been moved to the base less than 20% area. So the calculation as it currently exists in our code allows you to do a 2.5 times the 2 acres to increase that density. It's an incentive to further get the density off the hillside and increase it in those flatter areas. So in this case, with the 2 acres that they're now undisturbing, they get 4 additional dwelling units. Same thing for the 30 to 40%, just a different calculation. They are not disturbing 2.74 acres. So since they shifted that density, they get an extra dwelling unit per acre. So they get 2 more dwelling units. And then lastly, with the greater than 40% slopes, which is probably the most significant, is they shifted the density so that they preserve 4.23 acres of greater than 40, and they get 1 dwelling unit per acre that they did not disturb in the 40% or greater. So that did increase it. You can see on the plan, we have it noted they're at 56 dwelling units. So they got a little bit of an increase in this fake fund scenario because they shifted the density through the planned area development that would be reviewed and approved by City Council.
And it gets it down off the ridge.
Yes.
Any comments? This kind of reminds me of Prescott Lakes, that this could have been the scenario on I call it the slag pile that they got going on there. This would have been a much better option for them, but unfortunately, for some reason, the HOA wasn't consulted, which is required in their development agreement. Is there anything in this code that says, that we could put in that says something about HOAs need to be consulted?
We don't have anything in our current land development code. That was addressed and touched on when the administrative approvals went through a few months ago. We updated the resolution. So at least at the point of final plat, staff, if they're reviewing administratively, or an additional item in that resolution that was added was to get confirmation from the applicant that all CC&Rs, HOA, and those things have approvals. So that's been added at that level. It's not currently in our land development code.
What, could you say that again?
Yes. We went through and the administrative approvals from House Bill 2447. And with that, we had a resolution that existed for staff to review a final plat that said, this final plat is in substantial conformance with the preliminary plat. As part of that checklist, there was 5 things originally that we were looking at. Council added 2 of them to items, and one of them was that the applicant needed to confirm in writing that they had received all CC&R approvals and everything that they needed to prior to approving the final plat.
So sometimes they may have said that they did, but they didn't. Was that the issue?
No, this is new and doesn't apply to anything at Prescott Lakes. The Prescott Lakes issue is different, and it was approved in 2005. So everything they're doing now was approved and legal under the 2005 permissions granted.
Okay. Lois?
But I thought that as part of that discussion, I thought we were saying that we wanted the city to confirm that the HOAs involved have given approval. I didn't know we were empowering the person building or developing the lot to sign off that they got HOA approval. I thought we wanted us to confirm so we don't end up in a legal issue.
I think that we wanted to avoid a legal issue. We don't want to deal with HOAs. And quite frankly, we can't enforce CC&Rs. So an affirmation from the developer that and that they have the permission and that they've worked with the HOA limits us from getting involved in CC&R business. It would really be a problem if we are enforcing CC&Rs.
No, I don't want to be enforcing CC&Rs. I just want to make sure that we have, that the HOA has signed off. So you're giving that responsibility to the developer.
The developer to work
cities.
with the HOA to then confirm.
Because I think as Prescott Lakes is set up, I think Mr. Gehring can clarify that HOA is supposed to actually sign off on the actual plat, and then the city can see that.
Yes, the CC&Rs are contracts, right? They're contracts between property owners. The city's not a party to that contract. And so jumping into contracts between third parties isn't really the role of city government or necessarily any government. And so that was what was brought to council for approval. So it's not staff doing this. This was the document that the developers had to get approval from the HOAs where it was applicable. And we could, I mean, I think this is a discussion for a different time, but I think that involving ourselves in CC&Rs really becomes problematic.
We get
Yeah.
back to the presentation.
Thank you.
So that is how the density transfer bonus works. And I can move on to single site if we feel good about this too.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so our last scenario, again, this is what we heard as the concern to be added to, so an expansion of our existing code for the applicability to apply to single site development. Again, it's still a 21 acre, same parcel, and we kind of just drew some lines because we don't know what really a development could be, but this is just for demonstration purposes to show kind of where the line is at the bottom of the map itself. So then you can see the areas broken out so you know how much area is within each slope category, knowing how much is going to be disturbed. And again, we're really looking at the percent disturbed area to ensure and compare that to the maximum disturbed area. Yeah, again, to ensure that we're not exceeding the max allowable. So that's how the big piece of how this changes and applies to single site development is kind of those percentage applicability to the single site development. And this is generally, when we're looking at that, we need these tables outlining the areas to demonstrate they're not exceeding the maximum allowable.
So when you mentioned single site previously, that was like exempt. Single sites were exempt, and that's why we were having all the massive grading on our slopes and hillsides. So we're basically closing that loophole.
Yes.
And originally, under the current hillside ordinance, it says repeatedly that only city council can waive the code. But because of the single site, it allowed it to be administratively approved, and we really didn't have any idea what we were approving. We didn't know that had been waived administratively, and then when the project gets underway, we're kind of surprised, to say the least, as to how much grading is actually taking place. So thank you very much for taking care of this problem, because we have had a lot of questions from the public about this and from the residents of these subdivisions.
Absolutely. So, and there are no other questions on the single site? Feeling good, okay, because that largely is the changes and how it impacts and what we're looking for and what we see when we are reviewing permits. But I'm available for any other questions you may have.
Lois?
So I did have an exchange with Alex before this, and I learned, because it was, I love what you've done to concentrate it where development should happen and give density so that people can make money and have to win-win-win. So I'm very pleased with all this. The other thing that I've seen is this, concern from the community, the mass grading, the removing of trees, the removing of bushes and plants, and all sorts of native vegetation. And I was like, can we figure out, even in the ordinance copy they gave us, was this, a demonstration of what a wall would look like. And it had plants in it, but the code didn't say anything about plants in this. So I was having some of those discussions with her because I was trying to fit it in the Hillside ordinance, and that's when she educated me that it's not in the Hillside ordinance, it's over in our land development code. So that was news to me, because I've been hearing since I've joined, the Hillside ordinance, everything's been denuded, what's wrong with our Hillside ordinance, why isn't staff? So I just think this work that she brought up at the beginning about we're going to do the land development code is so critical, because this only solves a portion of the public concerns about mass grading and denuding of our hillsides. And I think the work that we do over the next year will help some of those other public concerns.
Yeah, I'd like to say that if you do mass grading and destroy a ridge or a hillside, then it's hard to enforce your erosion protection, erosion control requirements, and then it also makes it impossible to manage stormwater. So if we can protect our ridges and hillsides, then we can do a better job managing our stormwater and erosion control, and we won't have these huge dirt piles all over town. Thanks. Any more comments? Mr. Gehring, Mr. Gambogi, Patrick, Mr. Ruby? Thank you. Mary? Okay, are you ready to continue?
That was all that I had,
all right,
so I'm
okay.
good to go.
You do have public comment, Mayor, if you'd like to take it.
Just going to ask. Okay, fire away.
Tom Rusing.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Tom Rusing, resident of Prescott. I want to emphasize that I'm speaking purely for myself, and I do not represent any other entity or organization. I just want to pull some comments or some details from the Prescott Hillside Hilltop Ordinance or policy, but also from several other communities. So I'm just going to be reading a few things. So Prescott is surrounded by rolling hills and mesas. Development in these areas should include construction methods that ensure stabilization and minimize soil erosion, sedimentation, and hillside scarring. Prescott hills and mesas are valuable scenic resources that should be considered for preservation to the maximum extent possible. Dominant scenic ridges and mesas should be identified and developed with the goal of maintaining the city's unique visual setting, promoting its economic well-being, encouraging tourism and quality living, regulating the intensity of development according to the natural characteristics of the hillside. There's a few bullet points from further on in the code. Mitigate visual impacts by keeping structures below ridge lines, stepping structures with a slope, and minimizing the height of structures. Architectural features should conform to hillside characteristics, utilizing natural materials, earth tone colors, broken roof and wall components. These are some comments from Paradise Valley, Arizona. Camelback Mountain, Mummy Mountain, and Phoenix Mountain provide permanent visual presence that exemplified as what is unique about Paradise Valley. They define the location and character of the town, shape our sense of place, and contribute to the town's identity. Their purpose of their codes were to regulate the intensity of development and preserve and protect hillside environments, require building massing to adapt to the natural hillside topography, to preserve visual open space, unique natural features, wildlife habitat, and retain integrity and natural states of the identified dominant peaks and ridges. From Santa Clara, California, a couple points: to preserve vistas of ridge lines, particularly to avoid structures silhouetted by ridge lines. To promote development that is designed specifically for hillsides as opposed to recontouring the hillside to accommodate existing flatland building designs. And one comment from Colorado Springs: homes need to be set back a far enough distance from cliffs or hilltops so that the structure does not appear to be perched on the edge. I echo Lois's comments. I have had lots of people comment to me about their concerns about certain developments that are occurring in Prescott right now, including the one you can see easily from here at the end of Montezuma, the Bradshaw Mountain development, and several areas in Prescott Lakes, the new development with huge amounts of mass grading, and not only mass grading, but pushing that dirt over onto the hillside and creating a new problem that apparently now they expect Prescott Lakes to take care of. And then so we as citizens and staff and council should be acting with a vision to protect our hillsides and hilltops that are valuable resources to our community. They represent some of the many things that make Prescott special. We should review our current policies.
Thank you, but your time is up.
Time is up. No warning. Thank you.
That's all, Mayor.
Mayor,
Yes, Mary.
I'm sorry. Just from a procedural standpoint, I know this is a study session, but what would be the process towards having this recommended or optional changes go into effect, and where is the cutoff looking ahead as to when it would be applied to future activity?
So if everything, hello, me again, Alex Bramlett. If everything that we proposed, there's no different direction, we can go ahead and with a text amendment to our code, it starts with planning and zoning. So we'll take it to them first, and then we will bring it to council after for final decision. Once that ordinance is approved, it goes into effect 30 days later.
And where the cutoff is as far as should that all happen? Now it is in the code and it's actionable. Where's that line for projects that may be in the works or at the start of permitting? Where does it start to apply?
That starts, it will apply to anything that's, any applications that are made after that date. So if something's in the pipeline at this point, it has the entitlements that exist at this point. Is that the question?
Yes, thank you.
Would there be the possibility of a plat rush, people trying to get their plats approved before this is voted on?
There certainly could be, but if it were a plat, it already applies. So I don't anticipate that specific scenario being an issue.
So like anything that was submitted after today, the new ordinance would apply?
No, it won't apply until the ordinance is actually effective, which is 30 days after you all approve the ordinance itself.
I was hoping there was like a gray area or something, Okay, thank you. All righty, I think we're done with this item. Next item.
Good job, Alex.
Presentation and discussion regarding proposed updates and future adoption of the 2024 Wildland Urban Interface Code amendments.
I haven't done a presentation from over here. You got me hooked up?
Gotcha.
Oh, it's a,
So Conrad, it's up to you how you want to do it. There's a clicker over there and it'll do it IT as it pulled up in the back, so you can click through it, or Sierra can set you up
no,
over there. It's up
if
to you.
IT's got me in the back, we're all good.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Conrad Jackson. I'm your wildfire risk manager in the fire department. I'm going to give you the backdrop on why we have issues going on in the community. Oh, thanks, dear. Oh, that's the magic one? All right, get that bad one away from me. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you the backdrop on why we have an issue that's gotten to the point that it has. So for starters, we need to recognize where we live. We live in a fire-adapted ecosystem. We get annual monsoons, we get annual lightning strikes, we get annual fires. Doesn't matter what the fuel type is, grass fires, timber, brush, it just happens here. Now, when you combine that with the fact for the past 100 years, we've had fairly significant fire suppression, a lot of those vegetative materials have gotten thicker and thicker. It's only been since about the 80s when we really started changing our attitudes about how we approach vegetation and started doing mitigations, doing low intensity prescribed fires, things of that nature, brush crush, things like that to help reduce it. So we're just starting to make that turn now. But during that same century, we've also moved a whole lot more folks into our region, as well as other similarly, countenanced areas like what we see here. So as we're getting more and more people into our area, and we have expansion into those wooded areas, which we all enjoy. My folks live out in Groom Creek. Yeah, it's the same thing. They like that interface. We enjoy that look, and so we have more and more folks opting for that. Now, the catch is that we really haven't paid attention to our defensible space over that same time. So we've had people that have embraced building houses right in the thick of it. Oh, I love it the way it looks, and I want it to look au natural. And so we haven't mitigated that. And we have a lot of areas where we have a lot of materials, or even older neighborhoods like mine. I live kind of over by Taylor Hicks. It's an old, long-standing neighborhood, so a lot of that stuff has grown back and in and really thickened up in those areas. So we have a lot of areas where we have homes that aren't necessarily built in a very defensible fashion. And then you add the kicker that we're just in a hot, dry cycle right now. We have a persistent, ongoing drought occurring. So when you add all that up, it causes us some problems. So before I get too deep dive into it, I want to make sure we understand a couple differences in terminology. Wildfires versus urban conflagrations. Wildfire is just that. It's a fire in the woods, in the forest, in the grasslands, brushes, and timber. Versus an urban conflagrations. Once we see a fire transition into a neighborhood and start consuming houses, and we hit about 3 houses, then we kind of refer to it as an urban conflagration, because at that point, the brush is no longer the fuel. The tree is no longer the fuel. It's the homes. And as a good example, the 2 shots, I don't know how well you can see it. Maybe if you spin around, you can see it better. That's Lahaina. And it's the classic. It's the one house that survived in Lahaina. So the upper shot shows a before, the lower shot shows an after. If you look at the after, you can actually see stretches of vegetation in there. There's still leftover brush and materials. That's because the houses were the fuel, not the forest at that point. So it just happened to be that one house had taken some mitigative steps prior to that fire ever happening, and it survived the fire, which in my opinion is probably the worst day of their life. They survived, but the thing that they lived there for, their community is gone. So that just kills me, and I don't want to see that happen here in Prescott. Differences between hazard maps and risk maps. Hazard maps just are general identification of areas where we know that a particular hazard occurs. Flood map would be an example of that. We know that a certain area has flood issues. We know that our area has large areas of it that are at wildfire risk. So we know that those are the hazards that are there. A risk map kind of takes it down into a finer point, and you can adjust how much risk is a certain area exposed to. So if we take a flood map, we know that some of those homes that are in the lowest areas of the flood area are at higher risk, some are higher, less risk. Same thing with wildfire. We know that some areas, because of the nature of the land, fuels, weather, and topography, how things line up, they're at higher risk. Now, the nice thing about a risk map is that we can alter and adjust it by doing mitigations. We come in and do fuels treatments, we change the structures, we introduce hardscapes in there. We can adjust the risk. It may still be an area that by and large is a wildfire risk, but we've mitigated the risk in that area and reduced it. And so that's part of the International Wildland Urban Interface Building Codes role is to look at both those structural elements and those vegetative elements to create change. And so the three pillars of urban conflagrations are these. How far apart is stuff? Structure, separation. Anything less than 30 foot apart is at super high risk of just going structure to structure to structure. IBHS, which is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, would prefer to see 60 feet. I think we all recognize that the value of the property that we are all building on right now is not ever going to put us in that category. We're just not going to see that. If we want workforce housing and stuff like that, we're not going to be able to focus on structure separation. But we are going to be able to focus on the two lower ones, which is connective fuels, what kind of stuff is in between those structures, and building materials. So with connective fuels, the first 5 feet next to your house are the most important. If you can keep stuff, combustibles, 5 feet away from your house, you give your house a really good chance of being able to survive fire. Even a burning bush or a pile of wood or something like that, it just can't push enough heat up against the wall of that house to start converting the wood products that are in the house and pyrolyzing them, breaking them, turning into charcoal. It just can't quite do it. They found when they studied LA at zone 2, which is the zone 5 foot to 30 feet away from the house, if there was more than 25% vegetation present, it was doomed, 87% loss. And then the other category that we can control is building materials. When they analyzed LA, they looked to see whether or not they had Class A roofs, non-combustible siding, double pane glass, enclosed eaves, and 1/8 screen vents. And if they did, it improved their survivability from 36% to 50%, just on that alone. So,
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Ted?
just a quick comment on enclosed eaves. Do we have houses here in Prescott that don't have enclosed eaves?
not since 2008.
So, but there are houses built before 2008 that do?
Yes, mine. Have you been over there? Yes, I have open eaves. And that's pretty common. So if
You know, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
man, you're just mean.
But I did want to ask you a question because Conrad came and did a firewise at my house. We talked about eaves. Could you explain what the problem with open eaves are?
Okay, so when it says an open eave, it's that the eave of your house that you would stand on. The rain flows off the side.
Are you talking about the soffit underneath?
Correct. So is it open or is it closed? So if you're looking up and you can see the trusses, then it's considered open. And so that creates a couple different problems. One is it creates like a little cupping, so heat and radiant heat can both accumulate in that space. And also because of just the nature of the structure, over time you end up with little cracks in there, little openings, little spaces and gaps. And that's places where embers, as they're going through that heat vortex, get up there and they land in there, and then they can get and make the transference into your attic. So that's the vulnerability. So since 2008, when we adopted the Wildland Urban Interface Building Codes initially, closed soffits. You have it boxed off so it doesn't have that cupping. And so we saw that I'm aware of, I saw 3 houses last year lose their insurance and get non-renewals because they had open eaves. So they were forced to either shop around for a new policy or reach out to a contractor and see about closing up those eaves. So it's out there, it's happening.
So do you have any plans on your own home to remodel it to meet your fire codes?
Not until I either receive that letter from the insurance company that says, and I've already been, like I said, I live by Taylor Hicks. I'm in the middle of town. I've already had one non-renewal for me. So the catch is, and this is a little deviation here. The catch is when an insurance company does a non-renewal to you, they may or may not tell you why. Arizona law does not dictate that they have to tell you the reason why. It may just be you're a big red pixel on a map, which I'm going to show you here in a second. So every insurance company is different. If I have a good insurance company that says, hey, Conrad, the reason you lost your insurance is because that you have open soffits, well, then I can make the choice. I can either go and pay a contractor to come in and close those for me, or I can start shopping around. But there's only about 30 companies left that are insuring in the WUI in Arizona. So it's getting more limited. And part of it is because of what I'm showing you here right here. And we've had some significant wildfires. When insurance companies are looking at why or why not to insure an area, they look at the fuels, weather, and topography in the area, and they also look at the number of wildfires you've had. And if you ever go to this reshapewildfire.org website, each of these map sites where you can see the fire lined out is interactable. You float your cursor over it, it'll tell you whose jurisdiction it was, how big it got, when it started, all that kind of stuff. So we have legitimate large fires in our area that puts us on radar as far as insurance companies are concerned. But I want to give you some peace of mind. So you see, this is probably about 30 years worth of fires. So basically my career in the fire service. These are the fires that we didn't catch because of the weather of the day, pretty much, higher winds, dry weather. Here, just for your own peace of mind, these are the fires that we stopped. Okay, so just to show that difference to you. These are all the fires that your local fire agencies have been able to stop over the last 30 years. They're different colors because it's different jurisdictions. All the yellow ones are Forest Service, and then the other shades in there that I can't see because I'm colorblind are all the other jurisdictions.
How many dots are in there?
Oh, I did not count them. And if you back the map out, there's more and more and more. So yeah, it's pretty significant though. So we've got good stuff going here because we've managed to stop this. But as far as the Department of the Interior is concerned, this is what Prescott looks like. This is their risk map for our basin area, both Prescott, Prescott Valley. So you'll notice, and I really want to draw attention to this, so that the map on the right is grassland, brush, and timber. They're all at risk. You look at Prescott Valley. I hear people say all the time, oh, I live out in Prescott Valley. I live out in, an area that's grasslands. I don't have to worry about wildland fire. That's not the truth of the matter. If you live in a grassland area, it just means your wildland fire moves faster. Okay, we had the Prescott Valley fire, the Viewpoint fire a few years ago. That thing went 5,000 acres and took out 2 houses within 2 hours. That thing was hauling. But insurance companies basically look at us much like the map on the right. And just for your reference, the map on the left is the Department of Interior's comparison of how devastating a wildland fire would be and how likely it is. So I've got Prescott highlighted right there. You'll notice they're based on population, how big their circle is. Just to the down and to the right, you'll see a much larger circle. So that is an area that's more likely to get wildfire, but not so damaging. That's LA. So were we to get something that got into our community, it would be more devastating than what we saw in LA. That's how I couch that. Yeah. So non-renewals are up because we look like this. How do we not look like that? So we take recommendations from organizations out there. This is one that is giving information to the insurance company. This is the organization that's helping decide whether or not they do a renewal or non-renewal on your policy. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety makes recommendations based on testing, and they test all kinds of stuff. This is just one example here where they have a house that's built with materials that are resistant and a house that are built with non-resistant, and they have an ember generator that throws hundreds of thousands of embers onto the structure, and they see what works and what doesn't work. And that's everything from design elements like dormer windows or how the roof is configured, or the siding materials and the spacing of vegetation around it. They look at all kinds of stuff. They make those recommendations to the insurance companies. So like the open eaves. If IBHS is saying, hey, open eaves are a bad deal, insurance companies are backing off saying, okay, we don't want open eaves. None of our houses with open eaves, we're going to cancel those policies. I'm sorry, non-renewal. It's not called cancellation. So what should we be doing? What would IBHS and the WUIC codes do for us? Now, we would love it if everyone did everything everywhere, but we know that that's not the case. These are the 4 categories of things that we'd like to see folks do. We'd like them to do vegetation management. Now, I will show you, I use that. The picture that's immediately on the right, the quote that is next to it, moats in the landscape are not the answer. The house there immediately on the right argued that their home was firewized. And I think logic would tell you that that probably isn't the case, but what they had done is they had cut a moat all the way around their property. So they went to their property's edge, cut 5 foot wide, and all the way around the property and said, I'm good, I'm firewized. That's not how this works, okay? Embers
Conrad, you're talking about the top picture?
Yeah, the top picture. Now, the bottom picture was somebody that was, they didn't feel like they'd taken out enough. They wanted me to come and say, hey, Conrad, have we done good? Do we need to take out more? Because we're feeling a little uncomfortable with what we've got. And the bottom one's lovely. They topiaried everything up. They kind of left them as bushes so the birds and bunnies could still use them, and they cleaned up the grounds really good. There was going to be no ground fire traveling through that property. Whereas the one up above, if even any embers land on that, it's a goner. So we preach a lot of vegetation management, but we also talk about home hardening, which people lose sight of. That's part of the reason that we use the WUI code now. Home hardening refers to how resistant is the structure to embers and fire exposure in general. So the materials that you build it out of, the design implements like dormer windows, complex roofs, things like that, all play into that. Because one of the big issues is ember cast. Embers, as we saw like with the Legato fire, embers traveled 2 miles that were the size of the palm of your hand. It had that night, luckily it was overcast and kind of wet. Had the Legato fire happened on a day like today, we would have lost Prescott Valley in its entirety. It would have been horrible. So how good are structures to be able to resist embers landing on them? Class A roofs, attic screens are a big deal. And then having a zone 1, that first 5 feet all the way around it with no combustibles really buys us a lot with not having structures become involved. And then the biggest ticket and the hardest thing that I'm trying to work towards in my role is scale level neighborhood hardening. Because a single home that does a bunch of these implementations and does vegetation management and has good structure, a single home, they've protected themselves and they've got some ancillary benefits to their neighbors. But when you can have multiple homes in a row that start doing that, then they create a wall of protection that protects everybody downstream. Because remember, it's the house to house, the urban conflagration, the thing that we're really, really scared about. If we can start getting houses set up so that it doesn't happen, it doesn't become house to house, everything downstream helps.
Conrad, for the benefit of the people listening online, could you define what a Class A roof is?
So it's going to be something that's going to be ember resistant. And so what people have this misconception is like, oh, he means metal roofs or tile. And no, most all of your asphalt shingle construction that you see is Class A also. It's just as good to be able to tolerate ember fallout onto it. So yeah, asphalt shingle, and that's the best practices standards around here. I don't, short of somebody trying to build something with rolled roofing or something like that, and nobody does that here. That's just not how our roofers operate. So the problem with that one though is that the material itself is Class A, but if people aren't cleaning their roofs, then we have a problem. If they've got piles of pine needles, it degrades it. They lose structural composition as that fire, a bunch of kindling on your roof. It doesn't help things. So risk mapping, I mentioned that earlier about determining like where the highest risks are. There are several companies now that take into account hardened homes, hardscaping structures. It used to be old modeling system just looked at what does the topography look like, what kind of fuels are present there, and what is the historical weather patterns like. Nowadays, there's a few companies out there that are starting to develop really good risk mapping systems that look at all those elements, but also fold in stuff like roads and golf courses and waterways and things like that that influence how far a fire would go into a community. And when we start looking at that, and specifically I'll draw attention to the map on the lower left, is you'll notice that there's some red ones that are really, really high risk. So not only are they at risk of ember fallout, but they're actually just risk from the fire driving right into that neighborhood. And then the next tier back out, the blue one, is also, that's not necessarily a threat from a front of fire hitting it, but it's still at risk as embers. Embers will easily travel a 1/4 mile and start new fires. And depending on the weather, it could travel as much as 2 miles. IBHS is considering it 4 1/4 miles. So as far as their data goes. So as far as the insurance industry is concerned, if you're within 4 1/4 miles from any open space, then you're at risk. So this is what we're looking at. Now, in this one, you've also got whatever that purple-ish color is on that bottom left, all the way down on the bottom left of the bottom left. Those really just aren't at that big a risk because they're so far downstream of any wildland fire. So it's really cool that there's this new technology out there that's allowing us to run these really good risk maps. And we're kind of working our way that direction. That will also let me, as a manager, focus education and mitigation projects in areas that we know that's where the fire would want to come into our community. So that's where we get the most bang for our buck.
Excuse me, Mr. Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, Conrad, are we, the fire department, actually engaged in doing some risk mapping of our own neighborhoods?
Why, yes, we are. Yes, we are currently in talks with a couple different companies to help us generate exactly this. So, and that will tie into actually Chief Valdez's presentation as well, because we want to go this way, also because it removes the human element for the anecdotal stuff. Just because, 30 years of wildland firefighting, I can stand out there and go, oh, this is more cut and dried for us. Okay. So, whose job is it? Is it the city's responsibility, or is it the homeowners to do improvements? Should the state be taking over, federal government? I'm not going to deep dive into any of this. I just want you to realize that it's a little bit of all of it. The city does help, and I'm going to cover that next. HOAs and homeowners have a certain responsibility. Sometimes HOAs actually work against, or especially around here, they work against homeowners who are trying to do improvements on their property because they're trying to remove dead trees or old trees or trees close to the home. I use this picture in this example because the HOA refused to let this homeowner cut down that tree. That tree is lifting the roof off of the wall of the garage. And the HOA said, no, you will not cut down that tree. And so I had to step in and talk about the fire risk associated with this, and the HOA backed off and let that homeowner take down that tree. So sometimes we're working against ourselves, and we need to get a better plan about how we go about it. The state has programs out there that we utilize, as does the federal government, where I try to bring in grant money to help our community make things happen. And then the ultimate question is, should we penalize or incentivize? I'm your incentivize guy. I struggle to live in a community where everybody's being nasty to each other. I don't operate that way.
Conrad, didn't years ago the fire department come out and firewise people's lots?
So yes. So way back in the day, the early inception of what would ultimately become the Granite Mountain Hotshots initially started out as a brush mitigation crew. They got grant funding, and they literally went door to door. I think that first year they did over 300 houses, literally just going door to door. If you look, while that is a great thing in one aspect, if you're a landscaping company and city is coming in and taking money out of your pocket, it's not necessarily always well received. So that's a conundrum that we run into. We want to help homeowners. So I'm going to actually talk about some of the things the city does do to assist homeowners that isn't quite having a city crew come in and take care of their property. So we have our stuff heavily loaded into prevention. So we have had the Wildland Urban Interface Building Codes on the books since '08. I got hired two and a half years ago now in a new position to help manage our mitigation efforts in the city. I do lots of public outreach, not counting social media and radio and TV. Last year, I did 54 different presentations and spoke to over 2,000 people just in our community. So lots of public outreach. We provide free defensible space inspections. Councilmember Gambogi mentioned it. I come to houses, and I have a computer program called Fireside that we use. We photograph everything. We create reports for folks that they can refer back to, like, these are the things that are good about your property, these are the things you can improve, and then they can keep on working on that list. Our other agency, CAFMA, likes our program so much that they recently purchased it so the county can be using it as well. Chipping service, if you're not aware, I know a couple of you have taken advantage of our chipping service. Every Friday, the forestry crew comes around town and chips up materials. They can only do about 20 piles on a Friday, so it's a high competition to get those slots. And right now, solid waste is actually setting up to do a May brush pickup. It used to be in April, you could take your materials down to the transfer station. Well, if you have a car instead of a pickup truck, that's kind of not helpful. So they're coming to your house and picking up materials now. We offer $500 mitigation grants. Maybe you're physically not able to go out and do the work, so you hire a landscaper. We have an account set up in a budget line for giving reimbursable grants. We have 24 of those that we can give out for $500 a piece. There's a process, there's an application process and everything. Roll-off dumpsters, if a community wants to take care of their area on whole or take care of their common area, we will bring in a roll-off dumpster. Just last week, Prescott Pines Mobile Home Park on White Spar, just as you're leaving town, 130 single-wide trailers. They did a cleanup project. They removed 11.55, so 11.5 tons of pine needles, 2 40-yard dumpsters completely full. And we supported them doing that. And that's really important because those folks are right on the south edge of town. We have a good relationship with Yavapai Firewise, formerly known as POWIC. This is a 501c3 that helps bring in large grants, federal grants, state grants, and then redistributes them to the smaller Firewise neighborhoods, of which in Yavapai County we have about 50. We have the second highest number in the nation. And of those 50, 20 of them are in town, so in here in Prescott. So Yavapai Firewise is helping our neighborhoods in our community get money to do improvements in their property. And then we have the forestry crew. Recreational services is where they're housed right now, and they have to manage 5,000 acres that we as a city own, open space and parks. And so I help facilitate with that. We find grant funding, and in the meantime, like right now, they're working up on Acker Park. They just did the Boyle to Busk property right next to Mountain Club. Took out 180 dead bark beetle pine trees in there. So they're constantly at work. On the suppression side, every single one of your firefighters is Wildland qualified. They're all red carded 130, 190 basic Wildland firefighter, every single engine, every single personnel. We have automatic aid agreements here. So it doesn't matter what color the engine is, what the insignia is on the side of it, wherever the fire's at, we're going to send the closest engines first. That holds true also for our medical calls as well. Now, to make sure all those agencies are working together and doing everything in the same way, we have the basin drill, which was just almost, 2 weeks ago now. I don't know if any of you all went out and attended it, but that is where we bring all the different agencies, all the different fire agencies, and our cooperators, Yavapai County Emergency Management, Sheriff's Posse, and we do mock fires. And we do it for 2 days to make sure that everybody's using the same strategies and tactics, everybody's using the same radio frequencies so we can function as one. This is a unique thing. This does not happen elsewhere in the U.S. It is truly unique, and we've been doing it for 30 years. Prescott Fire is so serious about our relationship with our cooperators. If you're not aware, we co-house a Forest Service engine at Station 71 out on White Spar. So there's a green engine in that station. I was actually on that green engine before I came over to the red engine. So I actually worked out of Station 71 with the Forest Service. CAFMA's they've done one better. They have one Station 54 that has a Forest Service engine, and Station 61 out in Chino, they have a state engine, a DFFM engine. So they've got 2 stations that they co-house. On our horizon, we're working currently jointly with CAFMA on a CWPP, which is a Community Wildfire Protection Plan. This is basically the wildland plan, strategic plan for where we want to go in the future with dealing with wildfire issues. And that's both from a prevention standpoint, a suppression standpoint, and a recovery, because we know we're going to have wildfires. So the nice thing about the CWPP is it's not the fire department making it. We actually will be doing outreach in the coming months to bring on board members of Chamber of Commerce, realty groups, medical groups, to help the community decide what values, what things are important to them to create our strategic plan for the years to come. And then we're always on the hunt for grant funding. It's a little hard right now, but like I currently have one submitted to try to address all the city-owned properties less than 15 acres. If you think about it, we have a lot of pump houses, lift stations, smaller pieces of property that are embedded in neighborhoods. Well, if we have a neighborhood that's a Firewise neighborhood, but the city piece of property in there is not looking so good, we need to address that. We have a role in that as well. So I have a grant out there hoping to help us make that happen. Any questions for me before Chief Valdez comes up?
Yes, I do. We have Exhibit A, which was very extensive. Are we going to be going over that today? Because I have a lot of questions, or is that with Chief Valdez?
That will be Chief Valdez's. Okay. I'm just giving you the backdrop.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I live in a Firewise district, back up against the forest. And my home's about 10 years old, and it was built to WUI standards. I have a Class A concrete roof with metal, and I have a cement board siding. My soffits are enclosed and have no vents at all. And I have hardscape, pavers, gravel. And so I met all the codes, but our insurance was non-renewed. So even if you're following all the codes, it doesn't matter because the insurance companies are spreading the risk over the whole area and their expenses. So we're basically, we did get renewed with another company, but at a much higher rate because, we're paying for everything in California for the billions of dollars in losses.
And you're absolutely right. Every insurance company out there has their own business model as far as what risks they're willing to take and what liabilities they're willing to take on. And so some of those organizations are being very, very strict, like, nope, we're not doing this anymore. I've seen multiple companies. Swing by my office sometime, I have a war board on my wall, all the check marks of companies that I've gotten complaints about. Some of the companies are looser, so that's why you had to switch to something else, but they're also charging more and more to compensate for what they fear might happen in our community.
Yeah.
So if we don't change course and show a movement to improvement, we're going to see more and more of that.
Plus, I'm an old timer and had to evacuate in 2002 for the Indian fire, and it was no fun. I mean, I grew up in Arizona. I'm kind of used to seeing smoke in the air during the summer, kind of get used to it. But it was when you see the shooting flames coming over the ridge at your house.
It's a whole new level.
That gets your attention. I don't know if this is a question for Anthony, but is there any movement in getting 2 city-dedicated streets in and out of our subdivisions? Like the county just recently has been working on their on Wildcat subdivisions that don't meet the fire code.
Yeah, I don't know if that's in the chief's wheelhouse. I know that has obviously been a question and comment concern in a lot of places. And it's interesting because some of those neighborhoods, they use that actually as their selling point. You don't have to worry. People aren't going to be driving through your neighborhood to get to another neighborhood. And now that's
But it was a big problem.
Causing a challenge for them on the tail end of it.
With Cathedral Pines, they only had one way in and one way out. And the fire trucks were trying to get up a very steep grade, actually.
Oh, yes. Peterson is a very steep.
And then people were trying to evacuate. And we were lucky we didn't lose any lives, just some homes back in there.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for me?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
In the first 11 years that I lived here, I would grab my chainsaw and hedge trimmer, gasoline powered, just in case former Councilman Moore and Montoya are listening. And I hauled off about 60 pickup truck loads of cuttings off my yard. And then probably 2 years ago, because of medical reasons, not as bad as what Councilman Gehring is going through, I didn't. So in that short period of time, I had Conrad come out last fall and give me a Firewise, and I was shocked how much that yard had grown in just less than 2 years.
Yep.
Now, Conrad and I met with our HOA a couple years ago. In that period of time, I can't count anybody that are homes that are close to me that have had anybody come in and Firewise their lot. So the message for the community is we got to do a better job of Firewising, because on your page, well, you don't have your pages numbered, but you say that hardening one home improved is not enough to change the course.
We want scale level.
And we really do need to focus on having landscapers come in and clean out your lot, because it's not happening.
I agree. That's why we offer the support system we do. We just need more people to engage it.
Yes, Jay.
So, yeah, my question was, and it sort of leads off of what Ted said, what are the resistances to neighborhood scale level hardening, and what are successful ways to overcome those resistances? And is that a problem in Prescott?
It absolutely is. There's a myriad of things, and that's kind of like my role, is to figure out how we approach each of those. It's they don't even know what they're supposed to do. So we have people that just live in ignorance, and they're like, well, I put my head down, I'm not going to worry about it. That's why we offer the free opportunities to come and educate you and give you this non-confrontational, like, hey, it's your work of art, but let me tell you what things you could be doing better, kind of thing. So they may just not know. They may not be able to afford it because landscaping is really expensive. So that's why we offer the offset mitigation grants for folks to help reimburse them $500 for that. Well, maybe they're physically able to do it, but they can't afford it. And so that's why we offer the chipping services for them. So they can do all that work and they can manage that. So we're trying to offset those things. Where we run into a problem is if they can't afford it and they can't physically do it. And there's a big portion of our fixed income older population in this community. And so that's like the next bridge to try to cross, is how we can figure out. And that's almost like having somebody come in and do your property pro bono. So how do we make that happen? So that's one of my next goals, is like, how do we get that for the person who can't afford it and can't go do it themselves?
Mr. Grady, one more question.
Yeah, that sparked something. I was thinking back to the
Was that pun intended?
Paradise Fire. We have a number of mobile home communities, and those were the ones that were most at risk in that particular fire, and I suspect others. What are we doing specifically, strategically, or what are we thinking about doing with respect to those communities?
So the things that we offer within our community, all those preventive items, they have no economic bound. So I will go and do an inspection on a single wide trailer just as I would a palatial 5,000 foot manor. And the roll-off dumpster example is a perfect example of that. You know, that is a single wide neighborhood on the south end of town, and we as a city were able to go in and help facilitate their local community effort. Because not everybody in that neighborhood is able-bodied, but they had a team of about 13, 14 folks that went door to door and pulled out materials for their neighbors, acting as a community should, helping each other. And then the city stepped in and helped take that all the way to the end. So we're out there, we're helping. We can help those neighborhoods. Good?
All righty.
All right, Chief
Thank you.
Valdez.
Good job, Conrad.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Anthony Valdez, Division Chief of Community Risk Management. I also serve as your City Fire Marshal. Thank you for the opportunity today to go over our proposed amendments and ideas behind our adoption of the 2024 International Wildland Urban Interface Code. I will often refer to it as the IWUIC, just because it's a mouthful to say multiple times, and I'll have a fair amount of interchangeable terms for it. So I may just say the WUI code as well, as a little bit of an endearing term that we use. Madam Mayor, to answer your question regarding the communities on one way in, one way out, in the adoption of the 2024 International Fire Code that Council approved in November of last year, we incorporated an amendment that requires two means of egress and two means of access in all developments moving forward. So anything that comes to the city after January 1st will be required to provide that at a minimum.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So wanted to touch base on the timeline that we have been working with in our efforts to adopt the IWUIC. I'm relatively new to the city of Prescott. I started in late 2024, and probably within the first week of me starting here, I received comments regarding the Wildland Urban Interface Code and how it's enforced, and local amendments, and just all the variety of comments from both our developers and contractors, but also also even down to the individual homeowners as they were trying to do projects within their own private dwellings and so forth. And so it was something that definitely was on my mind as to how we could potentially improve. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but we are and were at the time still enforcing a fairly outdated version of the code. And I knew that just enhancing to a newer edition would probably help fix a fair amount of those. But anyway, that started in early 2025, January-ish. In September of 2025, as we were looking as a city to adopt all of the international codes, building code, fire code, mechanical, and so forth, the IWOIC was part of that package initially. However, in 2025, I proposed to Chief Dura that I just didn't feel like it was doing that specific code justice, and asked if we could pull it from the rest of the codes and give it a little bit more of a time to ensure that we were doing it right rather than just getting it through. And so that's when we decided, again, in September of 25, to pull it from the rest of the codes and proceed in the fashion that we're currently in at this point. So in November of 2025, we had a fair amount of internal fire department meetings regarding how to move forward with the strategic approach to adopting the Wildland Urban Interface Code. That also included meetings with the YCCA director and helping partner with her and her organization, receiving historical feedback as to how we've done the the WUIC in the past and so forth. And in December of 2025, we solidified our outreach strategy, which included significant public input and opportunities for folks to provide us that input. Also, the strategy to present to the Fire Board of Appeals and getting their guidance and input as far as what we were trying to accomplish, as well as our council orientation that several of you participated in. In January of 26, we advertised through multiple means, through all of the city's Prescott social media platforms, the fire department's social media platforms. We also partnered with YCCA to produce a YCCA mailer to advertise those meetings and outreach approaches. And that went out to a little over 700 people in our community. And we also did a radio interview with KYCA in early of January 26. In February, we hosted 2 public meetings, and I'll talk about those a little bit in the next slide, as well as focus meetings with our ComDev partners in our approach to what we were trying to accomplish, as well as conducted another radio interview with KQNA. And then May 26, we held meetings with the YCC board specifically, another one with contractors and designers, and then provided our council orientation meetings with you all and formally presented to our Fire Board of Appeals. And now we're in April 26, where our amendment drafts is completed and is being reviewed by varying stakeholders. And I'm here with you for council session, and hopefully your May voting session, we get to an adoption. So to talk about a bit of our collaboration, and again, I mentioned the timeline and the public engagement meetings. That started actually in December. In December 11th, I formally presented to the Prescott Area Association of Realtors to discuss the ideas of what we were trying to accomplish with the adoption of the IWOIC. And again, on January 19th, we conducted a KYCA afternoon show interview. Saturday, February 7th, we spent the entire time at the City of Prescott Farmers Market and did public outreach and education on the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. On Thursday, February 12th, from 5 to 7 p.m., I highlight that time just because we were trying to meet the needs of the community in varying timelines. And so we held our first formal public engagement presentation here at City Hall and Council Chambers. It was well attended. And on Wednesday, the 18th, we conducted that second radio interview with KQNA. The Prescott Talk of the Town was the specific show. And then Friday, February 20th, we conducted our secondary formal outreach presentation in the morning that time from 9 to 11. And it was held at the Center on Rosser. And that one was actually better attended than the one in the evening on the 12th. And then Friday, March 13th, from 11 to 1, we held a focused meeting with our contractors and designers to seek their feedback. So with that being said, we again mentioned that we met with the executive director of YCCA, got a lot of feedback from that constituency. We met specifically with the YCCA board. They asked for clarification on several of the goals that we were trying to accomplish and wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page with those. We have met and had several discussions with our neighboring partner, Central Arizona Fire and Medical Authority, in trying to align their initiatives of also, they have not adopted the IWOIC at all in their jurisdiction, but they are exploring that now. And I even spoke with their fire marshal this morning on their next steps that they're trying to employ. We met with our building department partners and discussed some ideas that we had for them to consider, and obviously our community development operations team as well. And then we had discussions around our existing amendments and how those are working and what changes we may or may not need to make, and then kicked around our proposed amendments significantly. And then, like I said, formally presented to our Fire Board of Appeals last month, and they supported our initiatives 100% with no specific feedback for changes. I had mentioned on our advertisement methods, we advertise via social media, City of Prescott and fire department platforms. Mentioned the YCCA mailing went over to 700 members. And the Daily Courier actually did an article on, they attended the February 20th presentation at the Rosser Center and created and published a pretty significant and thorough article that was published on the 26th of February. We offered everyone the opportunity to provide us feedback on any of the proposed changes that we were looking to do. We offered that to be in person, via email, via phone. QR survey, we had a survey that we produced and received some feedback through that method, as well as at end of each one of our presentations, we offered a question and answer period, which we got a lot of engagement in those opportunities. So just to highlight a couple of the comments that we received in the survey, but all of them were very supportive of what we were doing. They all supported the idea of incorporating the entire city into the Wildland Urban Interface, which we'll talk about a little bit more here shortly, and really felt like this was something that was going to benefit the community as a whole, in addition to helping with insurance and so forth. The one actionable insight we did receive from one contractor was the asked to be considered to remove our current amendment that requires hose bibs to be installed on all four sides of a residential structure. And we did consider that and evaluated it and had a significant conversation with our operations division and determined that that was not going to be needed moving forward. So we did take their recommendation and incorporated that into the amendments that we're proposing. Yes, sir.
Anthony.
Oh, it's not, obviously it's not my.
Yes.
Right.
I know, but it's a workaround.
Yes, Ted.
This one comment, have all of Prescott in the WUI. The question I have for you, Prescott is kind of a patchwork quilt. There's some people that live in the city and some people don't live in the city, even if within the perimeter of the city. So what about the people who are within the perimeter of Prescott but don't live in the city?
So those, majority of those, I have yet to find one that is not. We speak to them as the pockets of the county in the city, and those are, if not all of them, the majority of them are within the Central Arizona Fire and Medical Authority's jurisdiction. And that's why we are collaborating closely with them, because we know that their efforts are going to influence ours and vice versa. And so hopefully they will be successful in getting that adopted and being able to be enforced in their areas as well.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it brings to mind like Mountain Club right there on Copper Basin Road. And then if you go up further Copper Basin Road, there's High Valley Ranch, which is adjacent to our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And we're firewised and they're not.
Yeah.
We're downwind.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge, too, we have a phenomenal partnership with our CAFMA partners. And there is a colleague of Conrad's that does very similar work to his efforts within the city, and their program is a little bit being built at this point. It's not as fluid as Conrad's program, but they are working towards that effort, and so they are working together to help do those risk assessments of those properties in both jurisdictions and so forth. As I mentioned, we fully acknowledge that their efforts are just as influential as our efforts are to them. So.
Lois?
Thank you. Appreciate all the work and the timeline and the amount of public engagements you've done to get us to this point. Just for full transparency, so far all the community feedback that you're showing us is positive, but what, if any, were negative comments that we should be aware of?
I did not receive any negative comments. Like I said, the only actionable one was from that contractor. And then the only other one that happened at the very first engagement meeting was just if there was any way that the city could impose any laws or regulations on HOAs to have more authority to enforce. And I believe from the last presentation, the city attorney had given direction on that as not being an applicable item.
Okay, thank
Other
you.
than that, no other negative comments. Excellent. So just to capture what we're even talking about here, the overview of the IWUIC. So the scope applies to all buildings and structures that are constructed or moved into the city. It is not necessarily applied to existing structures. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It's really just a minimum code that's being established to provide the safeguarding of life and property. It is intended to mitigate the risk of a couple of different ways, and Conrad hinted at that a bit in his presentation. We're trying to prevent the intrusion of fire from the wildland fire exposures from the adjacent structures, so the urban conflagration item, and then the mitigate fires originating in structures and then spreading to the wildland fuels as well. So it's kind of a three-pronged approach that this code is really intended and purposeful in trying to mitigate that. And then it's also intended to apply a tiered risk approach to it, and we'll talk about that when we refer to the risk software that we are currently in the procurement process with, and how we're going to apply that. And then this is just the code that supplements our other locally adopted codes. It doesn't replace it. There may or may not be any conflicts, and then the code officials will rule as to which is applicable over one or the other. So historic view, this is not anything new in the city of Prescott. In 1990, the city of Prescott city leaders at that point identified that this risk was substantial and elaborate in our community. And they brought a bunch of stakeholders together, and the city council formally created the Prescott Area Wildland Urban Interface Commission. And this was a commission that was an advisory group that provided information on identifying and prioritization of the risks in the community regarding wildfire risk, and then presented those to the appropriate stakeholders and city council for consideration. And then in November of 2002, the city of Prescott adopted the first version of the International Code Council's Wildland Urban Interface Code. It actually wasn't even titled the Wildland Urban Interface Code at that point. It was titled the Urban Wildland Interface Code. It had those two words reversed. And it was not much more than a pamphlet of paper at that point, and it was very much so in its infancy. However, as the codes are created every 3 years, 2000, 2003, 2006, and so forth, the 2006 version came out, and the city of Prescott formally adopted that edition, and then subsequently adopted the 2012 edition, which is what we are currently enforcing, is still the 2012. And we are now trying to propose to you the adoption of the 2024 edition. So clearly we're enforcing a fairly outdated code and standard at this point. So our current experience in enforcing the IWUIC has not necessarily been consistently enforced since that 2002 timeframe that I gave you. It's been, from what I understand, in talking to those that have been around for those many years, it's been kind of up and down and cyclical as to how the city's enforced it and when they've enforced it, but it's been on the books that long and legally adopted. Many of the facets of our local amended code in its current configuration create a bit of confusion confusion and offer some varying interpretations in understanding of what those amendments are. And so that creates a fair amount of challenges with not only us enforcing it, but those that are trying to interpret and apply it. Our existing structures present complexity with new additions and alterations, such as folks that are trying to replace decks or maybe add a deck or enclose patios or what have you. Creates some challenges in that because all those additions or modifications in today's code requires them to meet the IWOOC requirements. However, it may be on a 1980s structure that does not meet any of those other provisions, but is now being applied to those additions or alterations. Industry challenges in adopting the code requirements. So those are industries that maybe don't have the materials quite fully tested and vetted to meet the standards that are required out of the IWOOC for fire resistivity or ignitable reduction. And so those create some problems that we help folks navigate on a pretty routine basis. And then also we receive a lot of plans and contractors that come into the area that aren't as familiar with the IWOOC, out-of-state contractors, or maybe those that are working or from the Phoenix area that is not an applicable code that is adopted in those areas. And those are some of the challenges, but I definitely want to acknowledge the positives to it. And it has really resulted in our significant progress in reducing our risk in our city and in our community for improving that structural hardening that Conrad mentioned and strengthening our vegetation management efforts. So it has provided a lot of positives in our overall efforts, and we're looking to continue in that effort and hopefully improve the experience for everyone. So our goals for adopting the 24 IWOOC was really to develop a collaborative solution among all the stakeholders that fosters an effective strategy for our ongoing efforts to minimize our wildfire risk and cultivate a fire-adapted community. One of the visions that Chief Dura gave me shared with me when I first got employed, actually, even in my pre-employment, he told me we need to continue to strengthen our fire-adaptive vision and efforts in our community. And so I definitely bought into that vision, and this is one component that will help us move in that direction. It's not the whole picture or the whole solution, but definitely a significant one. We also want to utilize data-driven decisions and how we're enforcing the code and how we're proposing our local amendments to you all, which we'll discuss on the next slide in a little bit more detail. And then align initiatives with industrial best practices. Unfortunately, as Conrad mentioned, we have a lot of historic fires in our country, especially in the western region over the last 10 to 15, 20 years. And the lot of devastation and unfortunate results of those. However, they also produce some fruit for us as fire service professionals and being able to use those scenarios to evaluate and apply scientific principles and studies and research towards that to try to mitigate that risk in the future in other communities and hopefully have a more resilient community in those efforts. And that leads into my last one, is to promote community resilience, but also to help homeowners either receive homeowners insurance, but also maintain their insurance policies. So one of the more significant elements that we're proposing to you all for consideration is redesignating our wildland urban interface to encompass the entire city limits. The current adoption, as well as what was originally adopted back in the adoption in 2002, designated about 80% of the city into the wildland urban interface. However, as you look around, and hopefully Conrad's presentation offered you a perspective that the entire city really is in the wildland urban interface. There is no different, it doesn't discriminate between the grasslands versus the heavily forested areas. The risks are a little different, but they still pose a pretty significant risk in doing significant damage to our community. So with that, we are proposing that we bring the whole city in. Also, when I did some research and trying to understanding of where or how the 80% was originally designated, I was not able to find a way to determine that. And there did not appear to be any kind of scientific or data-driven decisions with that. And I'm not exactly sure what and how that process was at that time. But the Prescott Lakes area, or right off of Rosser, is a good example where the Wildland Urban Interface stops at one lot, and the next lot and subsequent lots to the east look exactly the same as the lot that is applied to at this point, right? And so that's where we struggle, is that is completely still within the Wildland Urban Interface. And so those are our reasonings for why we were proposing that, as well as I showed in the survey results, several people acknowledged that seemed to be a pretty reasonable approach as we presented our information. We want to make the data and science-informed risk assessments of our community to determine the levels of ignition-resistant construction and materials. So the International Wildland Urban Interface Code in Chapter 5 is what presents us our construction requirements for hardening of those structures. They present 3 levels of that, ignition-resistant 1, 2, and 3. And there's varying different design and construction provisions that are required. IR1 is the most restrictive, and IR3 is the least restrictive. However, under today's currently adopted code, we are enforcing the most restrictive IR1 on everything within that 80% designated area. So if you are within that 80%, you are required to meet the most restrictive provisions, regardless of that level of risk and location in which you are in, related to the vegetative fuels and topography and the other conditions there. So what we are proposing to do is do a risk map of the community that's designed specifically for our community, and it establishes those 3 layers of risk: our extreme, high, and moderate risks. We don't ever really say low risk, because it kind of contradict itself that we're in a low risk wildland urban interface. So we use the terms extreme, high, and moderate. And so the map that Conrad had in one of his slides, where you saw he described the red, purple, and blue dots and how that community was shown there, that's what our community is going to look like as well. We're in the final steps of procuring. We're down to 2 companies that we're just trying to determine exactly which one is going to meet our needs the best and is the most sustainable for our community, in meeting not only how we're going to apply the IWUIC requirements, but also for Conrad's efforts. He had mentioned there at the end of his presentation that risk mapping is going to be a significant tool for him to be able to identify focused areas that we are applying our resources towards. And so I will have more information on that specific product. During this procurement process, we were offered the ability to show you one or the other, but I felt like that was a little bit of risk, because I want to show you the one we're choosing, right? So we don't over or miscommunicate where we're going with that. So I promise that will be available at a later date, hopefully for the voting session presentation. We're updating our vegetation management requirements. Our current amendments are pretty difficult to understand and interpret. Even Conrad told me at one point last year, he's like, yeah, this is even difficult for me to explain to people and understand exactly how, in the manner that they're written, and how we can convey it to a practical approach. So again, because we've had these unfortunate incidents, there's been a lot of research and science-driven reshaping of veg management practices. And so we are employing those in our proposed amendments to you all for consideration. We want to create a base standard construction requirement. So although you may be able to reduce the level of construction materials in that IR3 category, we are proposing to minimally always require Class A roofs, enclosing of eaves, and protecting of vents, because as Conrad presented to you earlier, that those are our most vulnerable areas of a structure. And we know that even with those 3 levels of protection, that we are significantly protecting our community, but also offering a little bit of flexibility in applying that risk-based scenario. This is probably one of the other big ones that I know our homeowners are going to really appreciate, but we're proposing that our existing structures that are not currently compliant with any addition of the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So those that were built in the 80s, 70s, earlier, and so forth. If they were to do minor modifications or alterations to their structures or even additions, then they would not need to meet the requirements of the IWUIC. This is a significant element that, as I mentioned, that creates a large part of our challenges.
Could you repeat that again?
Yes. So if the structure was built to a standard outside of the Wildland Urban Interface Code, so Madam Mayor, you mentioned your house was built to the Wildland Urban Interface, this would not be necessarily applicable. But if the structure was built prior to any of those adopted codes or was not built for whatever reason to the Wildland Urban Interface Code, then they would be exempt for minor modifications or alterations or additions that to the IWUIC requirements, because we looked at this from a practical and a scientific approach, that having a potential replacement of a deck, a 500 square foot deck that was built in 1980 standards, it's rotting and needing to be replaced for safety requirements. We now, under today's code, that 500 square foot deck would need to meet the Wildland Urban Interface if it's within the designated area. And that creates a lot of practical challenges, but also we now have a deck that meets the fire resistant 1 hour requirement, and the rest of the house or structure does not. So we are trying to apply a little bit of practicability with it, as well as using our data and our science to help back that.
Let me add on to that. I have a question, because we have a lot of seniors that live in Prescott on a fixed income, and they're in older homes. And let's say they have some sun or water damage on their siding of their home, and they need to replace it. They just want to replace, like, say, the south side of the siding, wood siding. Would they be able to do that, or would they have to bring all the siding up to the code, or could they just replace that one side with what they comparable to what they originally had? How does that work?
So under today's code and how we're enforcing it, they would have to replace it with compliant material, the Wildland Urban Interface Code.
The whole house?
Yes, or at least the portions that are affected of it.
Okay.
So, which is a little kind of counterintuitive, right? You're going to replace one wall that's going to meet the IWUIC standards, but the rest of the structure is not. So under the proposed amendments, we are proposing 25% of the total wall surface would, it needs to, 25% or less of the total wall surface of the exterior portions of the building would not need to meet the IWUIC requirements. But if you exceed 25% of the total wall surface, then you would need to do so.
Do 100%. And then what about roofs? You know, we have tons of hail damage here, and people are always replacing their roofs. And I talked to a contractor who's been, has lived and worked here for like 50 years, and he said, you know, the average cost of replacing a roof is like $30,000 to $40,000. But if you have to replace it upgrade it to a Class A roof, you know, a $30,000 roof is now a $90,000 roof. If you live in an older neighborhood, are you going to have to replace your roof with a Class A and just do the $90,000 job?
So to answer your question, yes, if you exceed 25% of the total roof surface, then that entire roof would then need to be Class A material. However, I'd like to offer, I did do a bit of inquiring around the area with 3 different contractors that specialize in re-roofs as well as new roofs and new construction. And the figures that I received were significantly lower than the ones that maybe you received from your source. And I averaged about a 2,000 to 2,500 square foot home, which I think is fairly average for the area. And the increase that I was told for adding a Class A material, it was approximately 50 cents to 80 cents, and that's just the pure cost of the material per square foot of the surface area of that roof. So I did a little bit of math and configuring, and I was given quotes from these contractors that 2,000 square foot roof surface. So it's not necessarily the house, but that's about what equivalent to a 25 to 100 square foot house. Is a re-roof is approximately $10,000, and the new build would be approximately $1,500 less. Also, every one of the contractors that I spoke to, they said their base standard is Class A roofs. It's part of their warranties. It's part of just best practices in the business and the industry. It's also their way to stay competitive, is because they know their other competitors are using Class A material and so forth. And so they just said that that's the base standard unless they're very well persuaded by the customer to use something different. So those were just the figures that I found. The high end on one contractor was a re-roof of a 2,500 square foot house. Depending again on the materials that are used, can go upwards to 23,000. But that was an extreme, and they explained that they used very specific materials and substrates and so forth. That they mentioned that some homeowners have a particular need for a higher end roof, and so that's what that would be.
Because the underlayment has to be fireproof too, has to be upgraded.
Not necessarily, it just would depend on the specific condition of that roof and so forth. So it may or may not, but more times than not, it's mostly the outer layer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty, any other questions before we proceed? Okay, thank you.
So the one critical part of that, though, is we know on the existing structure discussion that we also know that a very key component of protecting homes is the vegetation management side. And so the fact that we are not applying the IWOOC requirements for those smaller projects or replacements, we know that the the vegetation management side of things is very critical. So those provisions are being proposed to still be enforced in those projects and allowing the non-IWOOC materials. Another big change that we're proposing in the building department is in alignment with this strategy is they will be assuming the authority having jurisdiction over the construction provisions, specifically Chapter 5 of the IWOOC. This is a process that they've already collaborate very closely with us. They do all of the field inspections to the Wildland Urban Interface Code and today's code. We are reviewing those plans and then issuing the permit in those provisions, but then they're going out and doing the actual field inspections. In addition to that, they were already reviewing the home or project for either the residential code or the building code. So they're already looking at those plans identically and in correlation with us as well. And so it seems to make the most sense for both customer service in their ability to turn those plans around a little bit faster than we are, as well as they're completing about 85-90% of the work as it is, and so they've been very receptive to taking that additional work on and helping us, as well as it seems to be the most strategic approach to serving our community as well. And then just wanted to highlight that we did provide a historical building exemption to complying with the Wildland Urban Interface Code. There were a couple of examples that would have to be evaluated for that, but for the vast majority, they would meet that exemption.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that. That was one of my questions on page 4, section 102.9, historic structures. So that we have many historic districts in Prescott, so that excludes homes in the historic districts, not just the buildings downtown in our historic area downtown. So it excludes our historic
Yes, ma'am.
homes.
Yep.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yep. And so with that is the last of my formal presentation, and happy to entertain any questions or comments.
I'll lead off. Moving on to the pages aren't numbered, so page 5, down at the bottom, section 103.1, creation of enforcement agency, Is there going to be a new agency created in the fire department for this?
There is not. That is standard language that we have to amend within the formal adoption of all of our codes. And this specific section, we amended further by granting the chief building official the authority over Chapter 5 and the fire code official maintaining all the other provisions of the code. But this is just standard template language that needs to be done on all code adoptions.
Okay, great. And then on the next page, 110.1, under general, certificate of completion, and then there's going to be a certificate of occupancy. So are those going to be issued at the same time? I think you might have touched upon that. Or is it going to be two different visits, or how does that work? Because we're trying to streamline our processes here.
Yeah, so this is just it's a technical code geek terminology. So certificate of completion is typically on projects that don't influence the actual occupancy. So if a house was given a certificate of occupancy in 1990, the certificate of occupancy is still valid as long as it's being used in the purpose of what it was originally approved as. Certificate of completion is just the term as if you're going to complete a new deck. It doesn't affect the occupancy certificate. It's just another different term that's used to provide documentation that the work has been approved in how it was constructed.
Okay, and then moving on to the next page, 403.2.4, turnarounds, I assume those are cul-de-sacs?
Yes, in most cases.
Yeah, okay. And then you move on to 403.7, grade, no more than 12%. Isn't that a decrease? Didn't it used to be 20% or something?
It used to be 18. However, when we adopted the 2024 fire code last fall, we changed that to 12%. So this is just making it in alignment with the fire code.
I think that's a great idea. And then water supply, I assume you're talking fire hydrants?
It can be the particular term here is approved water supply. So in most cases, it's a water distribution system with fire hydrants, but we also allow for alternative water supplies in areas that don't have water distribution close by.
Yes.
So there's a couple of other codes and standards that are applicable and allowing us the opportunity to provide a different type of water supply as approved.
Okay. And then, let's see. I think that's pretty much, and then section 602.1, where you talk about automatic sprinkler systems. It used to be based on square feet, including the garage, and then out in Hidden Hills, they've got some of the houses are sprinkled and some aren't due to some codes. But now with this, everyone's just going to have to be sprinkled.
Actually, this is... So in the Wildland Urban Interface Code, unamended, it requires all houses within the Wildland Urban Interface to be sprinklered. This is amending to refer back to our City of Prescott Fire Code. And in the Fire Code, we have those thresholds that you're mentioning, 5,000 square feet or greater, and there's a handful of others. But this is just to be able to be correlated with allowing the Fire Code to drive it rather than having conflicting requirements.
So there's still going to be exemptions to new builds, not all being sprinkled?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way we could discuss that? Because I think that if you're going to have a subdivision with new builds, it doesn't make sense to me to have some of them sprinkled and some of them not, just due to some, code that could be more comprehensive. If we're all going to be in a fire zone, a WUI district.
So if you're asking my opinion, I think all homes should be sprinklered, but I don't want to go into that debate at this point. I will say that we are governed a bit by Arizona revised statute that was adopted in 2009 regarding the city's ability to enforce residential fire sprinklers. And it states basically that municipalities and counties are not allowed to enforce residential sprinklers or the installation of such. unless you had an ordinance that was adopted prior to December 31st, 2009. Fortunately for the city of Prescott, we had an ordinance adopted requiring sprinklers back prior to that. And so we have continued to enforce that as it was originally adopted. There is a provision or an interpretation of that statute that also states that it has to be unamended during that time. So you're not allowed to increase the restrictive provisions of those, nor can you take anything away, because there is an interpretation that any amendment to that original ordinance allows it to be void, and then the governing statute overrides it and states you're not allowed to enforce sprinklers in homes.
Because I know the insurance companies like sprinklers. You get a discount if you have them. Okay, well, that was interesting to know. And it looks like, and it's pretty specific about vegetation, which is good. I think that's pretty much my questions. So I guess the big decision here, do we want to extend this to the whole community?
That's one of
big
them, yes, but
question.
probably the
Yeah.
most significant.
And it sounds like you've done a lot of public outreach to educate the contractors and everybody on that. Let's see, we have Mr. Ruby for his comments.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a cost to updating to these codes, and the benefit is obvious. I'm wondering if there's going to be any type of return financially through either the extension of coverage or the reduction of insurance. Does that happen when communities take on EWUIC?
That's a great question. I want to start off with the response with just acknowledging that we are currently adopting the most restrictive provisions of the code. So in our proposal to you all for consideration, I think it actually allows for some reduction in costs where appropriate and applicable regarding the risk-based method that we're proposing. As far as the overall cost reduction, I would imagine that the insurance companies do take that as part of their risk profile and evaluation as to how they're going to assess their policy figures and so forth. But I do not have any hard evidence or data to provide to you for that response.
Because in doing this, like, the benefit is obviously a safer community. If the benefit is also a reduction in insurance costs and expanded coverage, I think that's something that is easy to sell to the public.
Yeah, and I think we do have evidence of the fact that insurance companies do consider it and allow for those renewal of policies. And for example, Conrad could speak to the details if you're wanting to, but he's done several assessments on properties that have received non-renewal notices, and those homeowners have acted on his guidance as to what they could do to improve their parcel and so forth, and they were successful in getting the insurance company to renew that policy. In some cases, it may have been a little bit more in premium, but in a lot of cases, it was somewhat comparable. So I do know that that is a possibility. Not all insurance companies follow the same standard, but in this particular case, it's worked.
Okay.
Thank you.
We got Mary next.
Thank you. I really don't have any hesitation for adopting this within the borders of Prescott. I guess my question is something tangential to that, which is, you had mentioned CAFMA is thinking about it, considering it. Do you know the process that they would go through to get that? I'm assuming they would need it greenlit by the county board. And so considering any of our county island neighbors, since we burn or not burn together, if any of them come to me and ask me, well, how can we encourage the county to adopt this great thing that you've just adopted? They can reach out to the county board. Yes?
Yeah, I
That'd be
think
great.
so. I don't know exactly where they are in their process. I think they're somewhat in the infant stages of establishing that strategic approach that they're looking to accomplish. So I don't know if it'd be a little premature to reach out to them, but I do know that, as I mentioned, I spoke to their fire marshal this morning, and he is looking to move that forward in the coming months. So I definitely know it's on their roadmap. I just don't know exactly the timing. But I do understand their process is a little more complex than ours, just in how they serve a variety of different municipalities and then the county as well.
I don't see any harm in flagging it for the supervisors that this may be a while in coming, but it's coming. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Lois?
Thank you. I love what you're doing and how you've done it, and you've taken your time, and I appreciate that, because I remember hearing about this in 2025 and thinking, oh boy, here's the next battle. So to see it go down with no negative public comments and support of YCCA and others is pretty impressive. So congratulations. I know Conrad is coming to my neighborhood tomorrow to talk to my HOA, and when I have mentioned before, in 2017 I was building a house here and helping my sister dig through the ashes of her home in Santa Rosa, and I can't say how happy I was to come and kiss every sprinkler, if I could reach it, that was going into my new home. So I definitely appreciate that. My only weird, you've answered all my questions throughout your presentation, so thank you. The only weird thing I saw was on page 5, and there's a point 8 and a point 10. They are almost identical. One has the word non-habitable and the other one doesn't. And one says greater than or equal to 10 feet, and the other one says more than 50 feet. And I was like, why do we have practically two identical sentences that aren't combined into one point? So educate me.
Editorial error. And it has already been identified and has been corrected.
Fabulous.
Yeah, the version you all got was a preliminary draft and was still being reviewed internally. And literally about an hour after you received that draft, we identified that and had corrected it. So thank you.
Yeah. And I'd like to comment that we're very fortunate that we have a fire center with the slurry bombers, and it is being expanded. And I remember with the Indian fire in 2002, they just circled over my house every 5 minutes. So hopefully the insurance companies will take notice of that and maybe give us a discount for having our personal fire center out there. Mr. Grady, do you have any comment? Mr. Gehring?
The only thing I would say is I'm in favor of it.
Thank you.
And Mr. Gambogi.
Anthony, very solid proposal. Thank you very much. And I think we should bring this bloviating to an end.
Oh, no. Are you kidding? This is a short one for us. And we have public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Well, then let's have some comments from our city manager. What do you think, Dalen?
Again, I think they've outlined what we're talking about fairly well. The question about the whole city or not the whole city really is just a question about, do we want to address each address based on the risk at that particular address rather than general maps, right? And sometimes the insurance companies get caught up in zip codes and that kind of thing. And that's something that we'll want to try to educate and improve the way they do things. But overall, again, they did a great job outlining, and happy to implement any direction that you give us and bring it back for your vote in a few weeks.
Okay. And our legal team over there, what do you think?
I have no comments. I appreciate it.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you very much, Anthony. That was a very thorough presentation, and also to Conrad and the rest of the team. A lot of work went into this, but we got to face facts. You know, we live in a tinderbox. We've got 30-year drought, and we've seen what's happened to other communities that haven't been prepared. So we need to keep Prescott strong. So I'm in favor too. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.